Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today I'm going to do a special presentation on the grand conjunction between the planets Saturn and Jupiter, which occurs on the winter solstice, the 21st of December at 6:20 p.m. Universal Central Time. Now this event has not happened in this zodiac sign since 1405, when the Renaissance began. So it's a hugely pivotal moment in our joint history. Now I'm going to explain what the combination between Jupiter and Saturn mean in themselves in Aquarius, but I'm also going to share with you on screen the event wheel so we can see what else is going on in the heavens to find out, as this moment occurs, what the other indicating factors are going to be, because it's very, very exciting. Also, please stay with me, because at the end of that part of my presentation, you can watch your zodiac sign by zodiac sign forecast for what this will mean for you. But if you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. And you can also order your personal year 2021 forecast and character analysis special offer presentation and get 30% off by seeing the link beneath this video. This will give you searing insights into what your birth data of time, date and place of birth means in terms of interacting with planetary movement this year. It's totally unique to you, and this will give you the ability to really understand in a very precise way exactly what your prospects are. But as far as this event is concerned, we're also seeing an elemental mutation, because over the last 200 years, the conjunction between these two planets has always been in Earth. So Earth is very much about the practical side of life, and air, where we're going to have a combination between Saturn and Jupiter through till 2199, is a much different vibration. It's all about communication. And if we think about the air element in terms of the tarot, it is of course the swords. So sometimes there's going to be ideas that don't always resonate jointly with us all, but then there is the potential to raise our vibration and come up with a more universal way of communicating. And Aquarius is very much the sign of person-kind, of humanity. So that's what makes this really exciting. Now the story, we need to go back a little bit, because in the latter part of December, really from the 7th, week commencing the 7th, Saturn and Jupiter were broadly conjunct anyway. There was only a couple of degrees between them. And then on the 17th of December, Saturn moved back into the sign of Aquarius. Now you may be thinking, well, I didn't realise that. I thought this was all a big story. But if you're aware, on the 22nd of March 2020 through till the 2nd of August, Saturn actually went through the sign of Aquarius. But of course it went into a retrograde on the 11th of June, and that's why it went back into Capricorn. What happens with Saturn is that it goes through 3 retrogrades as it goes through each zodiac sign. So over the next couple of years, we are going to have 2 retrogrades in the sign of Aquarius, because we've had the first one already. So the next 2.25 years, Saturn exclusively will be in Aquarius. Now this is really interesting, because Saturn is the co-regent of Aquarius alongside the more modern and dynamic energies of Uranus, which is the higher octave influence of Aquarius, which is very much to do with futuristic plans, being very individualistic, freedom-loving, perhaps a bit zany, but of course very attuned to trends. And Uranus is also the planet of truth. Now Saturn, on the other hand, is very much the planet of tradition. And of course, Aquarius is a fixed sign. So it does have a kind of a contrast, a dichotomy between that more progressive, changeable side of the Aquarius energy, Uranus, and the much more stable, resistant to change energies that come from Saturn. So there is a bit of a dichotomy there anyway. But Saturn brings structure to our existences. It's very much about boundaries. It's about self-discipline. It's got a dreadful reputation, of course, as being the great malefic. But, do you know, it's not always useful to think in these ways, because I know when I do personal readings for people, when Saturn moves across key house cusps or onto key planets, although it can bring restriction and limitation, very often it brings breakthrough, achievements and success. So please try not to see Saturn in very binary terms, that it can only be bad and Jupiter can only be good. It just isn't that simple. Now, Jupiter, on the other end of the equation, has just completed its journey through Capricorn, where it's in its fall. This is not its best location at all. Every 12 years we see a retraction, particularly around financial markets, which Capricorn is very much involved with stability, bricks and mortar, big business, big corporations and conglomerates. And of course, those have taken quite a hit over the last year. And you know, even without COVID, it probably would have been a much more cautious marketplace, because we have lots of other things going on in the world, such as trade wars, Brexit. We do have a lot of issues with a lack of balance between those who have wealth, and there's still a lot of people who are not achieving that same level of security, financial security. So there is a disparity between the haves and the have-nots. But as these two come together in Aquarius, and Jupiter moved into Aquarius on the 19th of December, they come together exactly at 0 degrees 29 minutes. And you can see from the wheel on the screen that they're just tucked up in the 6th house of this particular event chart. So the ascendant for this chart is 0 degrees Leo. So you can see, therefore, that Saturn and Jupiter are opposite the ascendant for this exact moment. So the ascendant in Leo at 0 degrees is very Leo, because the first 2.5 degrees in the 12th harmonic of Leo has a much greater resonance of Leo. So I think this is about wanting a recognition. It's a time in humanity's story when we want to turn up the volume. But what Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius are in the 6th house, obviously they're just in the 6th house, that's very much about health. And that's the challenge as a whole that we're dealing with at the moment, principally through COVID. But of course, environmental impact is probably going to take out a lot more people than COVID alone. And there's going to be other challenges coming our way. And of course, a lot of people are perhaps affected by the amount of plastics and toxins and chemicals and pollution in general that is really muddying our existence. We shouldn't forget that. COVID is the immediate challenge, but there are other challenges that are actually probably much more profound. So the 6th house is about reforming our attitude to health, structure, being more self-disciplined, but also being more self-sacrificing on behalf of our fellows. It's not all about what we want as individuals, which makes that ascendant in Leo rather ironic, because Leo energy is very much about manifesting our creativity and our charisma as individuals, but actually what we're being asked to do is to embrace the whole picture, the big picture, which Aquarius energy at its best, and I must stress when I talk about any zodiac sign, there is always a potential range of responses. We can access the very best of Aquarius nature, which is being truthful, kindly, considerate, embracing cooperation and collaboration. The worst energy of Aquarius is to be very detached, cold, logical to the point of not being invested in terms of our emotional relationships. So we need to embrace the best of Aquarius energy here. But you can also see on the wheel that Pallas is just into the 7th house, but is only, exactly 4 degrees away from the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. And Pallas is very much about what we can achieve in terms of our drive. So we're thinking about how we can use the right side of our brains to be more motivated. And I think the conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter and Pallas is really important. Also, if you see further back into that chart wheel, the Sun, which of course has just come onto the Earth point with the winter solstice, that is an opportunity in this last quarter of the year in its conjunction with Mercury to think much more carefully about how we use resources, Earth resources in particular. So that could be fossil fuels, for example. And one of the most marvellous announcements that I've seen recently is the Norwegian government, and Norway's been spectacularly successful in actually going after gas and oil in the North Sea. They've announced that they're no longer going to do that. So that's very much a Jupiter-Saturn event in Aquarius. They're moving on from the consumption energies of Capricorn to the higher way of thinking, which is new technologies, which obviously comes from Aquarius because of the futuristic way of Uranus's influence. Now, Uranus, of course, is up, as you can see in the wheel, in the 10th house, which is how we are with the world at large. And Uranus has really been warning us big time since the middle of May 2018 to the middle of October, I think, maybe November 18, as it went through Taurus to begin with, to be more conscious of how we use resources. And then, of course, it came back into Taurus, March the 7th, 2019, whence it's been since. It's in retrograde as this event occurs. It's in retrograde until the 14th of January. But the key here is it's in the 10th house of the world at large. You can see also we have Mars there at the top of that chart as well. And Mars is clashing with Pluto. So Mars is in the 10th house. Pluto is in the 6th of this natal chart. If we think of it in terms of a solar chart, Mars therefore goes into the 1st house and Pluto goes into the 10th. We have an argument going on between what we want to do as individuals, I, which is the ego of Mars in Aries, and we have the power of the traditional way of doing things, Pluto, structures, big business, corporations, big government. And I can absolutely assure you that over the next 7 months in particular, as Uranus and Saturn, the two co-rulers of Aquarius, are in a mighty struggle, we are going to see a lot of protest. It's not going to be a kind of panacea, this event, which brings a higher level of consciousness to everybody or all organisations straight away. It's a journey. And the journey will really pick up speed once Pluto moves into Aquarius in 23. It's going to be a temporary transit. It then goes back into Capricorn before going into Aquarius for the longer term from year 24. And this age of Aquarius is really going to catch fire by then. But we're definitely on the edge of a huge awakening. And COVID has made us aware, particularly about travel. Now, Jupiter governs travel. So in the sign of Capricorn, what it did was obviously hit our ability or our desire to go where we want, whence we want, and for great value for money, which is what business wants to deliver the consumer in a timely way, in a way the consumer can afford. But no one's been thinking about how that impacts on the planet. So Jupiter and Saturn still being co-present in the same sign as they were last year, but the difference is now there's the potential to be much more conscious of how this affects everyone else. So when we think about cruise liners and the dramatic impact they have on the environment, it's absolutely awful. They have the consumption in terms of particulates of something like 140,000 diesel cars a day. That's how much energy they use up. And these monstrosities are built I'm sorry if you've enjoyed going on one. I can imagine that it has been a lovely experience, but that's what we all need to do. We need to speak the truth, and Aquarius is the sign of truth. And of course, sometimes it's the inconvenient truth, which people don't want to hear, because it means switching from the old industries, the old way of consuming things, the old pleasures that we've got, which is like buying stuff online that's very, very cheap, that may be coming from China, which, this is not against Chinese people, is not good for the environment at all. Yes, it gives us a cheap thrill, but we need to become much more conscious of not having so many clothes, not necessarily driving a dirty old diesel car, trying to have a smaller car, hold on to it for longer, trying to use fuel in our home in a more economic way, trying to become much more conscious of containers that we use. And one of the things that struck me just this morning, actually, I was talking to Elisa, I was washing up, and we had an Indian takeaway last night. And in Britain, certainly from our takeaway, it's delivered in a plastic container along with a sort of tin container. And I said to Elisa, surely, I said, I feel awful that we've had this food delivered in a plastic container. Surely it can be delivered in some kind of biodegradable carton. And Elisa said, well, that happens in the States. But someone's showing a lack of leadership here in the UK, making sure there's legislation to stop businesses using this low-level way of distributing their products. And of course, I have to take responsibility because I had a takeaway. This is partly, of course, to do with COVID. But if we can all raise our consciousness about how we consume things in those kind of ways, this is going to be something that provides great opportunities. I mean, to be honest, have been into the Friends of the Earth for as long as I can remember, probably about 45 years. I remember becoming conscious of them. They used to have nuclear power, no thanks, as their logo when I was about 15 or 16, and I had friends who were in Friends of the Earth. So I've been very much into a pedestrian lifestyle, cycling for a long time, very much into recycling, and this is something that to me just seems very natural. If we can all cut down our consumption of meat, for example, or get meat that's more locally reared, that's grass-fed, where the animals are looked after better, all this has an impact on the environment. And this is what we all need to jointly do. So you can see from this chart, Mars is still saying, look, I want to do what I want to do, with Uranus there, also broadly clashing with Uranus and Jupiter on this moment, on this event chart. I'm going to do what I want to do, and I think this, I think that. Everybody has these very strident views. I think what we're going to find is that there does need to be a better balance between freedom and responsibility. And some big corporate business never misses a chance, particularly the big tech giants, to get a little bit more money out of us without much responsibility. So they're going to be really scrutinised over the next couple of years. I can absolutely guarantee you of that. They may be feeling that they've been able to trade in a very tax-free way, move money to offshore investment trusts, not pay taxes in local areas, but that's putting loads of retail businesses out of business, and of course putting people out of their jobs. It's not morally right. So the moral imperative is going to become much greater with this event. I must also tell you that this air transition of Saturn and Jupiter is going to go on to 2199, so another 200 years of air energy after having finished that 200 years of Earth energy. So huge opportunity for us to raise our thinking, communicate more, understand what it means for somebody else who's not in our situation. So if someone's comfortably off, they can see beyond that to see that there are people going to food banks, and that is disgusting in this day and age. Or we've still got people in the developing world who don't have access to fresh water, or we have drug companies that are charging a fortune for drugs that are freely available in the Western world but cost a lot, but are just totally unaffordable in those developing nations. That creates unhappiness, it creates it creates migration because there are no prospects for the people in their home nations. And because of the internet, people are much more educated these days, and they want a slice of something that's newer and better. That creates migration, that creates resentment. So what we need to do is even things up. There needs to be a much fairer way of leading our lives. And that is what this event is really about. But because Uranus is very much a rebel, and it's in the sign of Taurus, which it's in its fall, it's not its best location, and it's also making us much more aware of those physical resources that we're consuming. It could be that there's a kind of resistance between the new order, the new way of doing things, and people saying, well, I'm used to doing what I want when I want, flying to Tenerife from Britain for 30 quid or whatever it is. It's not viable. We might like to do it, but it's not viable. So there has to be a sort of a bigger picture, more cooperation and collaboration. Of course, countries may want to keep their independence more, like has happened with Brexit, but you know, that does work in a cooperative model. What you have is alliances, but greater individual freedom. So we will still see some countries wanting to separate from countries that they may have had an association with because they want their freedom. Very Aquarius, but they still will want to be on good terms. Very Aquarius. This is like a marketing group, a cooperative group, rather than a domination. So a domination would be, say, like the EU, big domination, which has been really seriously bad for the citizens of Greece and Italy, who've just been left to deal with the immigration crisis with no support, it seems, or very little, or they've had to deal with the impact of the euro, which has been very bad for them. And of course, we've got the Eastern world and also the China and North Korea, who have a very different worldview, and also India and Brazil, a very resistant view to the old, as they would see it, the old commonwealths that came principally from the Western European countries and latterly from America. So there's going to be a pushback against that. But all in all, we can't expect things to suddenly become perfect, because they won't. In terms of COVID, I think we're going to see a lot more technologies come in. There's various vaccines that I think there's 3 at the moment that I'm aware of for the Western world. There's one in Russia called Sputnik. Some people will be resistant to taking it. Some people will feel they want to take it. Technology, communication systems will improve. The response in Britain has been shocking, so slow, such a shambles, because everything had been stripped down to the bare bone before, so it's very difficult for us to respond to this situation. So I'm sorry if I've rattled on a little bit in quite an impassioned way. Of course, the other thing about this event is it's exactly conjunct my sun. And Pallas is exactly conjunct my midpoint between the sun and the moon in my natal chart. So this is going to see some very big changes in my life as well, I believe. But we can't underestimate that the sun is on that Earth point. So the last quarter of the tropical astrological year is kicking off on this event. And we also have a few other things going on. We have Venus in Sagittarius forging a super link with Chiron. So we actually have a grand fire trine between the ascendant, 0 degrees Leo, Chiron, 4 degrees Aries, and Venus at 7 degrees in Sagittarius. So what that tells me is we can heal ourselves by our passion, by communicating creatively, coming together, not taking such polarized positions. It's not just between our feelings, Cancer, and our desire for consumption, Capricorn, physical security, which the eclipses of the last few years have dominated. Of course, we've just had on the 14th of December a marvellous solar eclipse in the sign of Sagittarius, which forged a terrific conjunction with Mercury and also a trine with Mars. So that already is bringing energy in a fabulous way into this event as well. It's a new beginning. It is all about networking, better understanding of one another's needs. I do think we're going to see reduced working hours coming really quite quickly in the next year or two. This whole thing about people working from home, that, you know, there's going to be a pushback against that, because what you'll find is it's actually soulless. There's nothing in it for people. Being together as humans is actually a really positive experience. Having some time alone is also positive. If it's too much of one or the other, it doesn't work. So I think you're going to find that once COVID is pushed back more, there's going to be a raising consciousness that if we just have people working from home, they actually end up feeling quite lonely, quite isolated, quite alienated. And there's no doubt about it that along with the environmental challenges we have, isolation and aloneness are the biggest killers in modern society. And it's not good how people can switch out and think, well, they chose that. They chose to be on their own. That's up to them. Well, those people who say these kind of things are the people who probably have never done it, because if they had ever done it, they wouldn't come out with such inane comments. If you're lucky enough to be living in a loving family unit with lots of support, really count your blessings, because the more we're aware of those people who have less than us as individuals, the more we can take actions to invest in charities, make contributions to food bank, buy toys for kids who are not going to have a great Christmas, all this kind of stuff. The more humanity we show, the more we're bringing in this wonderful new dawn. But we're going to have to work at it. It's not going to be served up to us on a plate. Now, please stay with me for your sign-by-sign zodiac forecast. Hello, Aries. Here is your Saturn-Jupiter conjunction forecast for the next year. Well, of course, the last year has seen a big emphasis on your role in life. I don't think this is completely at an end, Aries. I think your desire to manifest your individuality is always high, but the link that you've got between Uranus in your second house and the square between Jupiter and Saturn that's broadly there by about 6 degrees, 7 degrees, just under. It does suggest, because that's going to be going on between Saturn and Jupiter for the first 7 months of this year, I think it's the case that if you've got associations, or your way of working, your way of earning a living, or your way of fitting into the world at large is in any ways impinging on your values, you're going to want to change that. It's going to be difficult just to be focused on goals, status, people's recognition of you, their admiration for you. Well, we all want admiration. The most important admiration to have is for ourselves, not in an egotistical way, in a way of having self-respect. So your consumption, which comes through Uranus in your second house, you may change the way you earn money to fit in with the way that you want to connect to others in a much more successful way, a way which is more meaningful for you. So it wouldn't be a surprise if you changed your approach to how you earn money. Therefore, so there could be a change of employment, or you may decide to work for yourself, or you may decide to work from home or work part-time, be a bit more flexible. A change is coming around those areas. But equally, if you've got friends, could be with people that you've known for absolutely years, and you're finding it more difficult to resonate with those people, well, I feel some new people are going to come into your world. You won't necessarily fall out with the old ones, you're just going to shake it up. And on this particular day chart or event chart, with Leo in the ascendant, you'll need to be much more creative, playful, self-expressive, find real joy in your life is definitely going to become much greater. And you can find yourself connecting with people through Venus being in your 9th solar house and looking for a greater truth around your associations. Now, Taurus, for you, of course, Uranus is in your sign and therefore your first house. So it's been shaken up, your desire for absolute stability for the last couple of years, especially if you've got the sun born in the first 10 degrees of Uranus. Uranus of Taurus. Uranus got up to about 10 degrees before the retrograde began. It's twisting back by the middle of January to 6 degrees. It's at 6 degrees 57 minutes at the moment, so it's got a bit more to go on the retrograde. But it is going to have that square with Saturn through the first 7 months of this year. For you, because Saturn and Jupiter are in your 10th house of work, but also property and also your life role, you could be going through something of a mini revolution this year. This could see you move, even if there are other people associated with you would prefer you to maintain the status quo. You don't make changes easily. You know, pushing beyond your comfort zone is not something you do without a great deal of thought. The problem is sometimes you're put off making changes because just staying as you are is so safe. And that's a really understandable human emotion. But also, if we stay so safe, there's no stimulation or spontaneity or risk in our lives, it becomes stupefyingly boring. So I think you're being pushed to think about those changes. But if you do want to have a romantic diversion this year, don't be surprised if it's with someone older, younger, meet through work, or even a bit secretive to begin with. Gemini. Now, having the grand conjunction right on your 9th house cusp of your solar chart is absolutely fantastic, because I think a lot of Geminis have really been pulverized by the massive energy, the posse in Capricorn, because that's about money, but it's also about where you're deeply invested. And you may have put everything that you had emotionally, physically, financially into something over the last couple of years. But if it isn't working for you now, the option is that you perhaps need to make a change. But if you do make a change, it could create a degree of nervous stress and restlessness over the next 7 months, because Uranus is tucked away in your 12th house. So that's a very subtle location. It's very evocative. It's disturbing sediment that may have been sleeping deep within you for a long time. So I'm talking about anything to do with past hurts, separations, injustices, where you feel that others have been inconsistent, unreliable, where they've betrayed you. All of these things can be aroused over the next 7 months because Jupiter and Saturn are in your sector of truth. And your desire for the truth is going to be very strong. But if you go through some kind of transition now, see it as being so potentially liberating, because all you will be doing, if there is still stuff to clear out, is getting rid of yet more old stuff to clear the space through for you to really go for your future as you exactly want. And I do think that if you have been working really hard, especially if it's anything to do with education, technology, weirdly, the travel sector could be an area that you can thrive in this year, but it perhaps will be in a slightly different way, because obviously we've all got to learn what the different rules and regulations will be wherever we are on this planet. So I think for you, you can gain the rewards for all the hard work of recent years, but there's still more stuff to clear out. But most of all, you're going to become a real truth seeker in all that you do. Sometimes people accuse you of being a bit frivolous, a bit perhaps even superficial in some ways. It really rankles with me, because it's not your fault that you can be flexible enough to get on with lots of different types of people. It's actually a very deep thing that, you will get on in your way, which is often through quick-witted communication, humour, educating people with your ideas. But I feel you could reach a new audience this year with those ideas. Perhaps if you are involved in writing a blog, or you're involved in technology in any way, you're going to find that someone becomes more attuned to your higher principles, and that can be very gratifying for you. Now, Cancer. Of course, the last few years has been really potentially tough for the cardinal signs, because cardinality is an angularity. So whether it's an Aries, Cancer, Libra or Capricorn, the big connection of planets in Capricorn has been affecting all four of those signs. And for you, it's been very much about relationships, where you interact with others, where you compete, where you provide your boundaries, where you perhaps want gratification in terms of relationships. So Jupiter and Saturn have moved into your 8th solar house, which is very much about not what people say, it's what they really mean. A deeper journey can develop for you. But because Uranus is in your 11th house, which is very Aquarius, ironically, you've got a Scorpionic energy competing with an Aquarius energy, and they're both fixed signs. So if you're resisting change, it can create tension. So what I would say is try to relax a little bit, particularly around issues of control. I don't mean that you're trying to control others. You can be one of the most caring, nurturing, supportive, kindly members of the Zodiac. But sometimes your disinclination to conflict, which other people would just say clearing the air, sorting things out, having a conversation, means that creates power vacuums, and that creates bad energy. Try to get over that. Try to embrace this energy of Saturn and Jupiter, to share how you feel, even when you're unhappy. Say what you want in a clear way so people understand your terms and conditions, but at the same time understand that other people have a perfect right to see it completely different from you. Once you acknowledge each other's positions, the more defensive side of your nature is swept away, and this is going to create better engagement, a more in-depth emotional contentment around your closest relationships. But Mars is still right at the top of your chart. So if you're wanting to be really successful and drive things forwards in terms of your goals and ambitions, Mars is certainly giving you a big push to do it. But I think there are going to be power battles if you do want to do it only your way. So a level of collaboration and cooperation is needed, and that's precisely what Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius are all about. So that's delicious. Now, Leo, because in this particular day chart, the ascendant is 0 degrees your sign, I love that for you. It means that Chiron, the healer, potential healer, where you can shine with your charisma, your knowledge, but also with Venus in your 5th house of this particular event chart, you can come across as being, use all that warmth, to light up situations fantastically well. But if you've got a relationship in your life which isn't working very well, and perhaps it's something to do with who wants to hold the power in that relationship, there's going to be a tussle over the next 7 months. And of course, if you've got your sun very early, or the moon, or the ascendant, or a critical planet like Venus or Mars very early in Leo, they immediately are challenged by the more limiting energies of Saturn and the more expansive energies of Jupiter. So there's a chance to grow your relationships, but if you've got a tender point in your scope or a relationship which is not working very well, I think it is going to come up for you to deal with in the first 7 months of 2020. But there's a lot in this chart which can bring magic to your situation. So there's choices. You don't have to accept how it is now if it isn't working for you. And obviously transitions, because you're a fixed sign, you don't like change any more than Aquarius people or Scorpio or Taurus people. You like the status quo. There may be a need to change something if it isn't working. It could be to do with a work relationship as much as anything, to be honest. Or if you're looking for work, COVID has changed things. You might have to start collaborating with people, or ways of doing things, or mindsets that in the past weren't really your cup of tea, because you can be incredibly traditional. That's lovely in itself, but in another way, it's also kind of maybe stops you seeing out a little bit, makes you a little bit too conservative. I don't mean that as an accusation. I just mean it by being honest. So opportunities for sure. So if you're single, someone magical can come into your world, but if you're involved in a already struggling relationship, you need to get it sorted. Now, Virgo, In this particular chart, you still have the Sun and Mercury, your ruler, conjunct in your 5th house of play. And ironically, Saturn and Jupiter combine exactly also in the 6th house in this chart, but also for you, thinking of your Sun as the 1st house, they are on the 6th house cusp. So are you happy at work? Is it wearing you out? Not necessarily physically, just emotionally. Is it giving you nothing back? You love to help other people. You love to provide services, and you get gratification from that. I do not mean being servile, but if you're doing something where the joy's gone out of it, you need to look at that, because if you don't, with Uranus in your sector of freedom, radical individuality, travel, breaking down structures which no longer work for you, new knowledge and information, just thinking you can forget about it and it'll sort itself out, it ain't going to happen. You need to confront whatever it is not making your world feel very enriched at the moment. So, for example, if despite your sign being linked to purity, you have got some niggling health complaints, but you're kind of, skirting around them a little bit, this is a time to get seriously virtuous, discriminating in the way that your sign is absolutely magical at when you're on absolute form. So if you're doing something to, we know we all eat cake and have a glass of beer or wine when we've had a hard day or we want to forget about life stresses and strains. It's when those things become a little bit more regular. So that's what you're being asked to look at. So if you're in a role, particularly around work, that's not very gratifying, or your life is super ordered and organized, but it's so sterile, it's giving you absolutely no emotional enrichment, it's time to change. That's the choice for you on this particular duo's influence. Now, Libra, I'm so happy to get to Libra, because you poor things, you have been absolutely smashed up. It's been going on since 2008 with Pluto going through the 4th solar house. It's really got seriously intense the last couple of years with responsibility for perhaps older folks, younger folks, limiting emotional circumstances, living in a home which perhaps isn't very comfortable, too small, too big, too cold. Something's not been great at some level somewhere. And of course, you've learned loads. You've learned that you need to embrace your emotion. You need to become much more assertive about your emotional boundaries, that you shouldn't be such a people pleaser all the time. And I think in the last 6 months, you've made great progress on that. Probably put a few people's jaws out of place, but good for you. Why is it that you are a people pleaser, but also a cardinal sign? You're a leader. Putin's a Libra. Not the best example, and he has got some really nasty aspects in his chart. Obviously, Gandhi was a Libra, Sting's a Libra, Thatcher was a Libra, again, a lot of Scorpio. But the key is you can lead, but at your worst, you can be too passive. And what the stars have been saying to you over the last couple of years is that to push back, if you've done that, you're now ready to really embrace joy. And that joy can come through being much more demonstrative, much more playful. It could be around children. So you may add to your family or start a relationship and kids come into your world relatively quickly. You could develop a hobby or leisure strand in a way which really brings great gratification for you. Now, of course, because Saturn on the 5th house, if you have it in a natal chart, it's a bit grim, to be honest. But I think here on the 5th house, it could bring someone into your world who's truly meaningful for you. But if a relationship, if you have been hanging on to it because you just thought, well, it's better than having nobody, it's not going to make you feel really fulfilled. It's your choice. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you what the planetary choices are for you to decide what to do. And of course, Mars continues in your sector of relating, and it's in an exact square with Pluto on this chart. So if you are unhappy, you're going to be majorly unhappy. And the next year is not going to get you away from it unless you take action to take back your power. So if you're putting up with something to keep other people happy, I really would consider carefully that strategy. Now, Uranus, of course, is in the part of your horoscope to do with money, entrepreneurship, investments, pensions, property. And you may be prepared to be a bit more risk-taking in those areas. But if you're also involved with anyone who tends to be very possessive or clingy or controlling or jealous, that could be something that really gets your goat over the next year. But if you really want to embrace your talents, you want to feel wonderfully alluring and attractive, Venus, your ruler, is in your third house of communication, and it's forging a great link with that ascendant in your 11th house of friendship and sociability. There's so much for you to go for that's really positive here, Libra. But I do think if you've been putting off a seminal thing that you need to do to preserve your sense of happiness, because you're maybe sitting on the fence, trying to find balance for all concerned, you may need to be much more dynamic and embrace that true cardinal energy that you have. Now, Scorpio, your two rulers are having a battle as this event occurs, Mars and Pluto. They ain't happy. 2351 on Pluto, 2312 on Mars. Woo! So, third house is where Pluto is, your passion around your ideas. Mars is in your sixth house of work. This chart can create stress for you if you're not happy in your work, or you're not feeling that you can manifest your ideas in a way which gives you a tangible return. Now, because Saturn and Jupiter are on your fourth house cusp, you could decide to move. It could have an impact on your relationship, so it means perhaps separating yourself from people that you're close to because you want to move somewhere different, perhaps because it's cheaper or it's a nicer environment. You might want to move to the coast, or you might want to move to the countryside or by a river or a lake, and in doing so it creates some disruption. That's a possibility this year. But also Saturn and Jupiter being on the fourth house can bring some improvements to where you live. You may be in a construction phase, you may be redecorating, you may be bringing a much greater different decorative order to your existence, which is proving very gratifying. Loads of good stuff can come. As ever with astrology, it's not one or the other. It isn't binary. It's a choice. The choice is yours. But if you are in an emotional relationship, in a close romantic tie that you're not enjoying, I think the next 7 months could be quite interesting, to say the least. The good thing about this chart is that if your finances have been a bit tight over the last couple of years, you're going to see an improvement now, so that's wonderful. Sagittarius, well, do you know, I'm absolutely thrilled for you, because Jupiter, of course, is your ruler. It also co-regent to Pisces people, but for you, Jupiter is about joyfulness, joviality, larger than life. You can be very funny. You've got an opinion on a lot of things, but you're also usually incredibly knowledgeable too. And having Jupiter move out of Capricorn, I'm just so pleased for you, because the last couple of years have probably seen a major slowdown of your income, which has probably proved to be quite scary at times, very frustrating. But if you've been working, really beavering away behind the scenes, experimenting with different things, it's possible that COVID has come along and made things even more complex and challenging. But now Jupiter and Saturn coming together, your mind's going to be switched on. Your ability as a communicator, a philosopher, the way you see the big picture. Yes, details bore you, and you're being asked by Saturn here not to ignore them. You've got to read things properly, absorb facts, so there is a chance to learn some new skills or learn new ways of interacting. If you're moving, there's going to be a need to work hard at your community relationships, or perhaps with a sibling. But with Venus in your sign, forging a marvellous link with Chiron in your fifth house of play, and Leo in your ninth house of expansion, do you know, your personality can just absolutely prosper. And bless that energy in Capricorn, with Mercury and the Sun together, exactly conjunct. All that hard work can now pay off, and something tangible can take shape. It's just that with with Pluto and Mars in a second, fifth house square, if you do get some money coming in, don't be too quick to spend it. Don't be too frivolous. Don't be too much of a risk taker with your resources. There's a difference between investment and gambling. And as long as you are aware of the balance of the ratio for you personally, you, with all the knowledge that you feed into your decision making, can turn this very much to your advantage. I do think that you're entering into a much more productive period, and that's wonderful to share with you. Now, Capricorn, there's lots of different ways we can look at your situation, because obviously over the last year with COVID, everybody's had some kind of impact on them, whether it's a limitation of social interaction, of physical touch, of seeing people close to you perhaps being poorly or even lost their lives, or it has been a much more financial impact. But what the transit of the first house was doing was asking you questions, and I'm talking about the big three. So we're talking about the posse of Jupiter, Saturn and Pluto in your sign, the stellium. What they've been asking you to do very intensely over the last year or so, and previous to that 2 years, is to clear out of your world everything that's not really relevant to you as an individual. Now, if you look back over the last couple of years, some subtle changes may have happened for you. Also, Uranus has been stimulating in you a desire to be more risk-taking around how you play or express yourself. Now, if you're someone who's got, some strong 10th house in your chart, some strong 5th house in your chart, you may not be as cautious, reserved, and quietly getting on with it in the way as the stereotype, the archetype of your sign. You can be brilliant fun. Capricorn people have one of the best sense of humour of all. As they get older, can be very shy younger on, unless you've got those modified chart factors which give you a more outgoing vibe. So if you are a more cautious, more traditional type of Capricorn, I think Uranus has been really posing you some questions over the last couple of years, and actually making you feel quite excited about being a bit naughtier here and there. Not necessarily following the rules. Being a bit more devil-may-care. Good for you if so. But we can't change the fact that Pluto, the planet of power, sits in an exact square with Mars, the planet of individuality. So your fourth, first houses are in conflict. If you're living with someone you don't like very much, whether it's a flatmate, a family member, a partner, and it isn't working, you're not allowing each other to give one another a bit of space, then it could be really tough for you to deal with. And so therefore what Saturn and Jupiter coming together in your second solar house is saying, that's about your core values. It's about your foundations in your world. And those foundations may be about to change. I wouldn't risk money on a project, a speculative project, without a great deal of care, because Uranus is squaring Saturn the first 7 months of 21. What I would do is I would be conscious that there may be an income stream that could slow down for you now, but you also have an opportunity to find ways to replenish this by doing other things. But I just feel that it's going to be a step-by-step process for you rather than any kind of wild venture, because you're genuinely thorough, applied, very hard-working, tenacious approach. You're not, you keep your feet on the ground where other people go through frivolous little trends and strands that go off at tangents. You keep plodding away to your goals and your ambitions. But I think they could change this year in a way that can surprise you. But it's that very deep emotional dynamic at the heart of your life that may still be causing you some concern. And if there is a transition you may want to make, you could be thinking about how you can do it in a way which works for you financially. In a more joyful way, having Mercury and the Sun together on this event chart is glorious, because they're so close together. They're not exactly conjunct, but it's very, very close. Just about less than 1 degree apart. So it's nearly combust, or Casimir, some people would say. Your ability to be ingenious is boosted by that, but also there is a downside with that conjunction that we can jump to conclusions. So when you hear information over the next year, don't immediately assume what you're being told or what you're reading is absolutely gospel. do a bit more exploration, a bit more research to dig out what's really so for you. Also, in this chart, beg your pardon, is Venus is in your 12th house. Venus in the 12th house is serious reflection around your love life, or it could mean that someone's going to come into your world in a slow way who can creep up on your consciousness. If it is somebody that you're attracted to, I think it could be somebody who has got their financial stuff really sorted, and your appreciation of them will definitely be psychological and emotional first of all and be paramount to you. But I think you will have respect for someone you encounter who's shrewd with finances. Not mean, shrewd. There's a big difference. So this person could be well off and they could be generous to you, but someone may approach you in a way which can surprise you. So if you're in a relationship which isn't very happy, someone can express an interest in you this year and it can really make your pulse race. We also have a lovely sextile between the moon in Pisces and also Pluto in your sign. That's gorgeous. It's going to be someone where you can really be passionate about your ideas and be uninhibited about sharing your deepest feelings. You can, of course, be very reserved, keep what you're really feeling hidden from others. If you have that connection with someone where you can just let it go, that's going to be so exciting for you, really. Right, Aquarius. So this is for me as well. This better be good, eh? So, as I said before, for me, this particular conjunction on the winter solstice actually happens on my exact. I'm 0 degrees 51 Aquarius. It's exact. So it's going to be a big year for me in all sorts of ways. Now, because we had a bit of a trial run between the 22nd of March through to the 2nd of August, a lot of positive things happened for me during that period. And as I said before, Saturn isn't always a git. It can sometimes be a git, but it's not always dark. It gives us that discipline. So if you've worked tirelessly on something and you are born very early in Aquarius, you can get a reward now. For other Aquarius people, this can be a time of new beginnings. Bring in a sense of sparkle. The things you've always believed in passionately can move into the moment. You're going to be much more in vogue. The darkness, the kind of rejection that's been so manifest over the last couple of years for a lot of Aquarius people, just feeling really in the cold, that's the de-icing. It's not completely there, it's de-icing. The people that you really still don't feel are understanding your qualities as a person, you could still be a bit of a rebel and a bit outspoken with them. I don't think if there are family dynamics, they're going to mend particularly soon, to be honest, if my experience is anything to do with it, because Uranus in Taurus is still making you potentially very outspoken. And if people have been very unfair, very, very unfair, your anger and sense of injustice about it is still going to be very, very strong for the next 7 months. But there's enough in this chart to bring some really glorious new people into your world. Playful people, fun people as well. It is a new beginning. It's fantastic for Aquarius people. I'm so happy for every Aquarius person because all that energy in Capricorn has been quite a hard hoe. Unless your sun has really been quite late in Aquarius in your natal chart, your progress chart directions, if you know your astrology and you're watching this because you know where they are in a progressed or directed way. For people who've had the sun between about 23 and 25 degrees in Aquarius, maybe as much as 27 degrees, probably it's been quite good because it's been a semi-sextile. But if you're earlier born in Aquarius, I think the 12th house energy has been really difficult. So more energy, more vitality, more enthusiasm, but things are going to be shook up at home. So that could mean leaving where you are now, moving somewhere radically different. It's not necessarily going to be a walk in a park. It won't necessarily solve every issue in your life, but you will feel rejuvenated and reborn from taking your power back. Now, as always, we have Pisces. Last but definitely not least. Now, Jupiter, of course, is your co-regent. The other thing is that Jupiter is actually going to be coming into your sign mid-May through to the end of July. And again at the end of December for about 3 days. So this year isn't all in your 12th house. But for you, Jupiter in the 12th house is about philosophy, spirit guides, higher knowledge, a more spiritual dimension, a need to be escapist. You may, if you really love the sea or water, want to spend a lot more time near it. It's possible that if there is hurt, some past debris, that this can be a good time to have counselling, to go through some kind of therapeutic process. If you work as a light worker, a healer, a psychic, you work as a carer, you're very compassionate, this can be a time when your skill set really gets saluted. But I think it can also be a time when you're trying to balance more what you get for you, the individual. So that old maxim that we all have to live by, healer, heal thyself, I think there is going to be a bit of a split dimension between what you do for others, where you can be hugely sacrificing and kindly, and what you do for you. With the Sun and Mercury together in your 11th house, friendships is an area which may have struggled over the last couple of years, but I think new people can come in, but it needs to be new people who've got a real sincerity about them. Just having friends for the sake of it isn't going to be enough for you. It's going to be a lot of chat because obviously Uranus in the 3rd house, but if you've got friends who are more of the fair weather variety or a bit gossipy, you could find this quite draining and wounding over the next 6 or 7 months. Clear out in a kind and generous way what's not working for you. With Mars in your 2nd house of money, you can make progress with money, but if you make money but in a way that's an empty process for you, so you work in an environment which has not got many principles attached to it, that might be something that you have some conflict around because of Mars and Pluto in a right angle. But with the moon in your sign on this chart linking perfectly to Pluto, it's the depth of relationships with the people that really matter that's going to count most for you. And with Venus at the top of your chart, if you really do want to make progress in a new way, doing something that's much more gratifying for you, that perhaps has a greater sense of value to it in terms of your principles, and that comes from that cooperative conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter, that can be very helpful to you. But it also points towards you at times over the next year wanting some moments of isolation and escapism from others. That concludes the zodiac sign forecast for all signs for the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, the grand conjunction. It's such an important event, this elemental mutation into the air sign of Aquarius. This is so exciting. It hasn't happened since 1405. Thank you so much for joining me. Please check out my special offer, Year 2001 Personal Horoscope, beneath this video, 30% off. But for now, stay safe, take care, and good luck.